What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Valley coming at you with yet another unplanned solo podcast. I already miss Grant. I hate doing these things myself, but we need to talk about the Dejounte Murray trade, which is, look, it's a pretty big deal. So the terms of the trade, you have Dejounte Murray headed to New Orleans in exchange for Larry Nance Jr., Dyson Daniels. The Lakers is 2025 first rounder. Remember, New Orleans had 2024. They deferred to 2025, and then a 2027 first round pick that is the lesser of Milwaukee's pick or New Orleans's pick. And also, to get the other details out of the way, this will be completed in the current league year using Dejounte Murray's current number, which is sub 19 million. However, because the Pelicans are not only just aggregating salaries, but they are taking back more money than they're sending out, and this would have been the case regardless of when it was completed, unless they super expanded the deal, they will now be hard capped beneath the first apron. Part of those calculations now in this CBA, unless I'm misremembering the last CBA, you are going to have to include unlikely bonuses as part of those calculations. And so Dejounte Murray, I think, has $1.5 million in unlikely bonuses. That leaves the Pelicans currently, after this trade, 8.5, 9 million away from the first apron. And they're inside $3 million of the luxury tax. That is, and I think we'll start with this deal from their side, because there's so much that goes into this. You can like it, but there is going to be challenges that it creates. And that figure being so close to the first apron is without potentially paying Jonas Valanciunas, without Najee Marshall. That just presumes that they're not there on the books. And so that is something to figure out in all this as well. Now, from a pure value play, I very much like this Dejounte Murray trade. I do also like Dyson Daniels as a player, specifically a defender. He has some really good feel for the game when you're talking about his vision in transition, going downhill, even just kind of throwing passes, letting players develop away from the ball when he is holding it himself. But you're getting a fringe all-star who's on an extension that is going to age incredibly well. By the end of it, he's not even going to be making, Murray, I'm talking about, 17% of the salary cap, like projected. And it's probably, honestly, it might even go down, like based off the current projections. So to get a player like this, and anyone who listens to this podcast knows, and probably anyone who watched the Pelicans knows that, yeah, while there are needs to diversify the front court rotation, higher volume three-point shooting, they also needed an offensive organizer, someone who could run things effectively, independent of Zion Williamson, because at this point, Zion is one of the most dominant players in the NBA, and he was fantastic this season. But you're at a point where you just can't count on him being there when it matters most, not through any fault of his own, but it's kind of the same story with this course. They were always dealing with something, and Zion a lot of times at the center of it all. And without him, you lost your offensive engine. Like, you could approximate some of it, but Brandon Ingram isn't a reasonable enough facsimile. We've seen flickers and flashes of what he can do when he gets going downhill and as a passer in that regard, but it was inconsistent. They were just, it wasn't even ebbs and flows. They were just, dredges and mountaintops to what he was doing as a playmaker. And even when he would play well off Zion, or has played well off Zion. And look, part of that's on the stop and start nature of the Pelicans in general. Brandon Ingram gets injured, Zion gets injured, other people get injured. But it just felt like they were living separately, even when he was working off of Zion and not dominating the ball as much. So you get someone in Murray, who I firmly believe is better equipped to run things when Zion is off the floor, but I think is also improved enough as a shooter that you can envision him working alongside Zion. And if the roster stays this way, Brandon Ingram as well. He hit over 39% of his catch and shoot threes in Atlanta this past season. He, for a good chunk of the year prior to the All-Star break, he was hitting like 35+% of his off the dribble threes. That number then plummeted. I think he finished the year at like 32 something percent there. Some of that might have had to do, though, with that Trae Young injury, that span where he was everything to the offense and didn't really have a great offensive supporting cast around him. That's going to impact those numbers. Point being, look, the Hawks won the minutes that Murray played without Young, and the Pelicans just have more talent on their roster than the Hawks do, even in the minutes when Zion is not on the court. So I like this pickup there for what you gave up for him, for what Murray's making when you're talking about building out the rest of the roster. And I think that this significantly boosts New Orleans' ceiling without sort of knowing, okay, well, what's the next move? Because a few things we have to consider, and we're just not going to have answers to. Woj kind of mentioned that they're still trying to figure out an extension with Brandon Ingram. He's eligible for that 4-year, $208.5 million extension. They don't want to give him the max. We'll see if that creates an impasse in talks, and maybe even an impasse with his future in New Orleans. Woj also kind of painted it as like, okay, Zion and McCollum and Trey Murphy and Herbert are the core, And like Ingram is, they're just trying to figure out an extension with him. That's just something to monitor because, like, yes, Brandon Ingram's a really good basketball player, but New Orleans still has other holes to fill. And maybe you view Jordan Hawkins as someone who will help boost their 3-point volume. Okay, that's fine. And you have Trey Murphy. Now you have Dejounte Murray there. But you need a big man still. You actually need a big man. Technically speaking, there is no big man. Zion's a big man. There's no center under contract for next season. Jonas Valanciunas is a free agent. You traded Larry Nance Jr. Cody Zeller is a free agent. And I don't think that they're looking at this as, okay, we'll sign. I mean, I don't think they're looking at it like this. Okay, we'll sign some guys off the minimums, or maybe a little bit more, depending on how much room we have beneath the apron or beneath the tax. It still might be a team that's looking to duck the tax this year. We'll sign a minimum big or two, and Zion's going to play a bunch of center. I don't think that's the direction that this is headed. And what's also interesting, though, is that, okay, well, you can't just go out and spend money on a center, even keeping Jonas Valanciunas at this point, because I'll use the first apron number, so that $8.5 million that they have to sort of play around with. Color me skeptical that New Orleans is going to pay the tax next year, though. And so I'm almost looking at that. Okay, they're inside $3 million of the luxury tax right now. How do you figure that out with Jonas Valanciunas, let alone Najee Marshall, by the way? So I don't know what bigs, even if you're going to go, I think Jonas Valanciunas probably gets more. I mean, if he was willing to come back for 8.5, you might as well, just as a pure value play, and then figure out how to trim money later. But that doesn't leave you with a lot of flexibility to make other moves. Then it's like, we're talking like there's other moves that need to be made, needs that need to be addressed. And what also gets difficult is now you've played your two best trade chips in terms of, okay, this isn't a mega deal. We don't need a mega salary to match things, because Larry Nance Jr. is next year, he's at 11. And then Dyson Daniels next year is at like 6 and change. And now when you're looking at it, okay, yes, you still technically have those salaries, but you're not trading Trey Murphy, who's at 5.2 million for next season. I don't think you're going to want it. If this ends with them trading Herb Jones, who's at 13 million, talks fell apart in February because they wouldn't include him in the deal for Atlanta, which ended up, they waited. That ended up playing out really well for them. And I don't remember what I said at the time. As someone who said in the past that they should trade Herb Jones, I think Pelicans were mad at me. It wasn't so much this season, it was the previous season. I can't remember the name that I said I would consider doing it for, that ended up being egregious. But I don't think this season I adjusted my priors with more information. I'm not going to apologize for that. I wouldn't have made that deal either. And it ends up really working out for you here too. You give up two, like, what do we call them? Like mid-end first round picks plus Dyson Daniels. That ends up being good value for you. So you're not moving Herb. You're not moving Trey Murphy the third. And so if you're not, like, I'm looking at strictly, let's just say sub $20 million salaries. There's Jordan Hawkins at 4.5, and that's it. Like, you're talking about, okay, Jose Alvarado's on the books for 2 million. Jeremiah Robinson Earl's on the books for 2.2 million. Matt Ryan is, if you guarantee his contract, that's at 2.2 million. So, like, you look now at, okay, they're not moving Zion, and we're going to presume they're not going to reroute Murray is making 25.5 million next year. So that leaves Brandon Ingram or CJ McCollum. And I'm looking at CJ McCollum's deal. I think fewer teams will want it. There is only 2 years left at about $61 million short term. So it's an overpay for someone who's going into his age 33 season, or so it feels like. But he's also really important to their 3-point volume still right now. Murray's not a super high volume. He gets him up, but he's not a super high volume guy. CJ McCollum, along with Trey Murphy, has turned himself into like a higher volume guy on the Pelicans. So I'm looking at Brandon Ingram. He's extension eligible. He's going in the last year of his deal. He's 27. Are you looking to break him up into multiple players? That feels like, I'm not going to predict that's what happens, but I would be semi-shocked if both he and CJ McCollum are now on the roster to start next season. I probably would have said the same thing had you asked me this. Like, I didn't say that in our look ahead, but we did mention that, okay, Grant and I went back and forth for a while on, he would rather trade CJ. I argued you might be able to do more things with Ingram. And I think that if he's going to yield more trade value and just based off what you need and his fit with Zion, he would be the guy I would move. And in part because I might be viewing too much into, okay, CJ makes X, 33 million next year. Like, who's going to view that as a value add when he also makes 30 million the following season? With Ingram, it's okay, he's in his prime or just entering his prime. Yes, we have to sign him to a new deal, but that's fine. He's 6 years younger than CJ McCollum about. So I don't know how this changes that context, but when you look at what Murray does best, it almost to me makes it feel more likely that Brandon Ingram will be the one move now. However, I'm fairly confident in saying that one of those two dudes will wind up being moved. It just seems to like, I don't know how you're fleshing out the rest of your roster, even if you don't care about going into the tax at this point in a competent way. And also, I think, I mean, maybe not. I don't know what deal you're taking back that would make a team uneasy where, okay, we're okay having this huge CJ McCollum number on the books. And that team, they're going to have to be comfortable enough in their salary situation to be like, okay, we aggregated salaries, maybe took on more money, and we're fine just being hard capped to that first apron. So you're almost limiting yourself to rebuilding teams in that scenario. Uh, I, I won't go that far, but like that basically feels like what it might be. And look, that's not, again, outside the realm of possibility. But if you're looking to get a meaningful big and the name that's going to be thrown about is Jared Allen, Brandon Ingram feels like the best way to do that, where you can break him up into multiple contracts. Um, at this point, if you can figure out how to make it work within the first apron, you can take back more money to kind of limit the downside if he's going to a team that's a contender like the Cavs, or if there's a third team that's involved in that situation. So if you can take back a little bit more money and you're getting 2 or 3 players, and the team that technically is executing the other side of that trade is saying, okay, like we're just hard cap beneath the second apron now instead of the first apron, that becomes a little bit more palatable. You also have not, I don't know, in when you start getting into different players, it gets interesting. Okay, well, would you need to attach anything to a Brandon Ingram for, let's use Jared Allen as a proxy. I don't love Ingram's fit in Cleveland with Murray, with Garland and Mitchell. But like, just as a proxy, is it okay? You're giving Ingram for Jared Allen and George Niang, and then you're still taking back less money. So are they adding, like, you could bring Dean Wade back in that, or are they just going to throw you? I don't know who gets you there. I think Ty Jerome, that's still not really enough just because Jared Allen's so cheap. He's 28.5 million. So when you're trying to bridge the gap, it would almost have to be like Dean Wade would be almost a dollar for dollar match at 6.2. So you're looking at 14.7. That's 34.7. That's still not. What is Brandon Ingram on the books for? Isn't he 36 next year? Am I misremembering this? Oh no, okay, that's right there. He's at 34. So that's almost, oh, that was this year though. So he's at no. I'm sorry. He's at 36 million. I'm looking at Zion Williamson's salary. I apologize, everyone. So you would need to, in Cleveland's case, like if you really wanted to do it and you're not giving up Strus, like you're kind of looking at 4-for-1 territory in that regard. Maybe you're just fine being hard kept to the first apron, but that might not be something you'd be interested in. So you could target other bigs, but it's almost like there needs to be teams that have multiple players you want, because you can't just go out there and let's use Jordan Hawkins as an example. Is there like, you use Jordan Hawkins and then you use like one of your other smaller salaries and there's an even cheaper big after that you think upgrades your roster in a meaningful way? When you're considering just contracts right now, or salary cap hits, there's no one that immediately springs to mind. Even Robert Williams III probably makes too much money for that to go down, even with the Pelicans, like if they figure out a way to make it work beneath the first apron. So what I'm saying is the Pelicans are not, they might be inflexible. They're not out of moves, but whatever move they make next, it almost has to be like a mega move. Like, are they just cutting a ton of money to where then they're okay? Like, is that, and maybe that's part of a CJ trade? Or are you compensating a team to take on some of his money? Or is this like a situation where I kind of thought about it? What would you need to give? Because this is short term for them, and he addresses some of their needs. I'm not going to reveal the team just yet, but like, are you kind of looking at, well, what do we need to give Orlando with CJ to get either Jonathan Isaac or Wendell Carter Jr.? And you could take on like other money that they have, but if they don't want to work with cap space, I guess that's fine, but they don't have bad deals on that road. Like, there's just not a single bad deal on that roster. And so you could say, if they wanted to operate over the cap or just pick up these team options, it's all right. We'll send Joe Ingles. I'm all tongue tied at this point. So like, could you do something like that? What does it cost to get, just as an example, to get Jonathan Isaac? Don't necessarily love what that does to your spacing, but he's a defensive monster, although you're now tethering part of your livelihood to another injury prone guy. But you're getting Jonathan Isaac, and then you're shaving, if it's CJ McCollum's salary, like $16 million. And plus he has another 30 left in his deal. Now it helps that I think he's actually a good fit for the Magic. And so he gives you that. I would say it's secondary playmaking. So you're not getting a floor general, but when you have Jalen Suggs and Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, maybe that's okay with you, and you get some run to Cole Anthony, maybe Anthony Black there. Although Cole Anthony could be, you wouldn't really need him though in that. But if you're looking for more money for Orlando to send out there, are you giving up more first round equity for that? That doesn't really make sense. I'm saying from New Orleans's perspective, and I don't think Orlando's interested in just a straight up swap, even with Jonathan Isaac's like perpetually odd availability. So I'm very fascinated to see what the Pelicans do next. And I don't know what that move is going to be, but there needs to be like, you just need to flesh out the rest of your roster. And so it's either going to be this mega move that's bringing back, just because of the players and the level of salaries that would need to go out, a bunch of players, or maybe a bigger name that I'm not even considering right now, or they're going to look to kind of cut money that way. And I would assume it's not, you could do the best of both worlds in a Brandon Ingram trade. I mean, if you offered Orlando Brandon Ingram for Jonathan Isaac, I don't think would they give you first round equity too? So you're kind of turning around and you're using that flexibility to sign a big, maybe some shooting, while saying you're not getting super cap flexibility, but just using your mid-level. I guess you can go that route, but like turning Brandon Ingram into picks and Jonathan Isaac and the ability to use your mid-level exception is a little underwhelming. And I don't even know if, again, Orlando has Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. They could all play together and they'd be ultra huge, but so it's going to be along those lines though, where because you're sending out a bigger name or a larger salary, if you don't consider CJ McCollum a bigger name, like you would call it a mega trade, whether it's cutting a bunch of money or taking back a bunch of contracts, or maybe a singular talent that we're just not thinking about right now. I mean, like this could be a multi-team trade and you end up with a Brook Lopez is on the roster, but Brandon Ingram's on a different team because he doesn't really make any sense in Milwaukee. I think the New Orleans Pelicans are doing something interesting. So I like the trade for them, but it does put pressure on them to really hit on whatever comes next. And that's an uncomfortable spot to be in, but what they're doing is fascinating. And I really do like this trade for them overall. And I think in part because I don't think it's going to be as hard to win or upgrade or be comfortable with a CJ McCollum and or Brandon Ingram trade as many others believe, where people might think it's too hard to trade CJ McCollum, or they think that you need to get back more for Brandon Ingram than maybe the Pelicans will, or maybe that's even out there. But I am confident, I guess I'm more comfortable with trading either one, and specifically with trading Brandon Ingram to make those moves. And look, if they're not making any other moves from here, you really need to hit on some cheap big men. That's just that's not that this says nothing of, they still kind of do need like some higher volume 3-point shooting in there. Maybe just if you trust Murray and then you have Trey Murphy and you have CJ McCollum, maybe that's enough. And it's not like Brandon Ingram is a non-shooter in the way that Zion Williamson is, and it doesn't fucking matter because Zion is Zion. But it would really be, okay, you need to hit on kind of a cheap big here. Is that, are you bringing back Cody Zeller? What does it cost to get Goga Batadze? Can you even afford him? Again, like Goga Batadze is he's not closing, but as your starting center, it just, it puts you in a little bit of an iffy situation there. So like the trade for them, there has to be more to come. From the Atlanta Hawks end of the spectrum here, look, they shave in salary off of next year over $8 million. And so now they have more than $10 million in wiggle room underneath the tax. That's clearly going to be important to them. This does not signal to me that they're going to do any sort of quasi rebuild or overhaul. They don't control their next 3 first-round picks. Those are owed to San Antonio. Part of the appeal, I'm sure, of this trade was you get a pick in 2025, where technically you have a Kings pick there, but you get a pick in 2025 and in 2027. Both of those are years in which you owe your selection to San Antonio. And you also owe a 2026 swap, but that's neither here nor there for this trade. Now, you're also getting back a player, though, in Dyson Daniels, who comes in, very good defender already, just absolutely suffocating and can basically guard 4 positions at this point. You pair him with Zachary Risache's there. Are you building something kind of interesting defensively? You have Onyeka Okongwu there. Jalen Johnson's really malleable. Clint Capella is still like a fairly good rim protector. But like you now have, not that you're loading up, because we don't know what Risache is going to look like next year defensively, but you look at players on this roster, you say, okay, longer term, maybe there's a path to them building a good defense around Trae Young. And do you have the money to say, let's go out, because they do need a backup point guard, and get a DeAnthony Melton, and you kind of built up your defensive infrastructure even more? I'm not too worried about Dyson Daniels' offensive limitations. I think he has good vision when he's in transition, when he gets going downhill, even in terms of letting, maybe I said this at the top of the podcast already, but letting plays develop. If he's going to stand at the top of the key, letting guys maneuver to get open and finding them and putting the ball where they're going to be rather than where they are. But he did shoot over 50% on floaters last year. I think it was only like a 62, 63 shot sample size. From what I recall, some of those were in some garbage time minutes, but still, there's that. If you can generate enough spacing, which I think for the most part, Atlanta can, especially if they're maybe considering lineups with not even Onyeka at the 5, but maybe even Jalen Johnson at the 5. But even so, with Trae Young on the court, if you have DeAndre Hunter on the court, Bogdan Bogdanovic on the court, there are things that you can do. And so if he can get to his floater, that becomes a value add for you. And he's 21. He could just get better. So he's certainly worth developing. But this signals to me, though, because they prioritize players, and yeah, maybe they settled in the sense that there were other teams that could have given them better deals, but a couple of potential suitors came off the market. I know they were linked at the trade deadline. And there was no way they were making this move now, but like you could have, like the Knicks were interested. They were off the table once they gave up all their picks for Mikal Bridges. And I want to make clear, there's no reports about them being interested right now. You also saw the Nets at one point mentioned that by trading Mikal Bridges, you took another partner off the table. Philly, okay, they have a need, but if you wanted play, like they could have a need if they whiff in free agency. But the Maxey Murray pairing, I don't think it was terrible, but is that the best use of their resources? And also, they could only give you picks back. They couldn't give you players. The only potential deal on the table is, if it was me, I would have prioritized draft equity over getting Dyson Daniels. And that's someone who's a Dyson Daniels fan. Could the Lakers, would they have given you their 3 firsts that they could have traded? I guess, are they that high on Dalton Connect that he wouldn't have been on the table? Would they not have been willing to include Austin Reeves? I think when I'm looking up and down, yeah, there are teams that could, in theory, have beat those bids. But when I'm looking up and down potential suitors for Murray, and it wouldn't have been San Antonio at this point, even if it was, you weren't getting all of your picks back based off the value that you got here. You clearly weren't going to get all your own pick rights back in that trade. It was really the Lakers is the only team that it feels like they could have given a better offer. I don't know if they would have, but it also very much seems like Atlanta wanted to make sure they at least got back a body or two. And this Larry Nance Jr. could play for them. I mean, like, you could try a front court with him and Jalen Johnson, and then you have Dyson Daniels and Bogdan Bogdanovic and Trae Young, and see what that does for you two-way. And then also DeAndre Hunter could factor into that. You can mix and match there. Maybe Zachary Reese is playing really well as a rookie. It's like those 7 guys that I just named. It gets super interesting. They still have needs. What's going to happen with Clint Capella? I think he still can be serviceable. He's on an expiring deal. Will they sign someone who could play backup point guard and maybe defend really well next to Trae Young and be able to log minutes in tandem with him? But the value here isn't great. It is less than they gave up for Dejounte Murray. And I thought he probably could have gotten them more, but I do wonder to what extent their desire to get an actual player, which that's just how I'm interpreting this deal rather than pure draft equity. And it wasn't just, they got 2 actual rotation players out of this. I know now Larry Nance Jr. is injured, but he's a good basketball player. And so I'm wondering how much that factored into, well, maybe they could have gotten 3 raw first rounders, future first round picks, and just elected against it. Or maybe a rookie from this season, but they preferred a rookie from this draft class, but they preferred someone who had some NBA experience under his belt, like Dyson Daniels. So I'd be reticent to say I loathe this deal for them. It's obviously not the greatest look, but you kind of need, it's a meh deal, but there's also value in recognizing you need to cut your losses. And they were blasted with Dejounte Murray and Trae Young on the court together. I don't know, even as good as Murray is, that his value would have increased from here. I think you risk actually squandering it. And without knowing what other offers might have been out there, I also wonder, as I mentioned before, was there just a level of pressure because in theory, at least one potential suitor came off the table in Brooklyn. Like that's a team that's not going to trade for him now. And it felt like they could have been a looming threat. And if the Lakers kind of also telegraphed, like, we don't want to give a, Dalton Connect now because he fell to us. It's like, we'll give you those 2 firsts and some swaps, but you're also not getting Reeves. That might have taken in the Hawks' eyes another suitor off the table. Like, we don't want necessarily Rui and Gabe Vincent or Jared Vanderbilt, whatever the smattering of contracts you were offering. So I almost kind of feel like some of the transactions up to and like it at the draft worked against them getting better value for Dejounte Murray here. Interested to see what they do. They're a team that's clearly not going to pay the tax, but they could increase their wiggle room beneath it and be, really not aggressive, but they could access their bigger, they could use their bigger mid-level right now if they're willing to pay the tax. But will they try and cut costs elsewhere? Whether it's, is there a team that would take Clint Capella into their cap space? Maybe if OKC misses on Isaiah Hartenstein and doesn't want to spend, trade for a higher profile big, and it's, yeah, Clint Capella doesn't fit with their 5-out motif, but frankly, neither does Isaiah Hartenstein. But just to get someone who can maybe give you some more rebounds, and more of a traditional screener and roller, and he's on an expiring contract, maybe they would just be fine with that. Atlanta also just has some smaller deals that if you're looking to just access the bigger MLE, I don't know who you're really trying to go after. Again, I mentioned D'Anthony Melton. I don't know if he requires all of it, but if you wanted to look at moving, I don't know. There's like you could just renounce, like Garrison Matthews is a team option that could come close to getting you there. Clint Capella might just be the guy. Maybe it's a DeAndre Hunter trade, and so you're cutting more costs that way. Still not a player I would dump. I don't know when I became higher on DeAndre Hunter in consensus, but I believe we're there. I mean, if you don't want to, if you're going to keep Clint Capella and you have Onyeka Okongwu and you have Jalen Johnson, maybe you just look at, there's a team that I'll assume be like, yeah, we'll just take Larry Nance Jr. And you're saving money that way, or are you sending him to a cap space team? San Antonio could be someone that has interest. Maybe Detroit, like they probably wouldn't. You can't really call him a stretch big. He took very few 3-pointers. He will take them though. So you could look at it that way, and they could say, look, we have him and Isaiah Stewart. There's 2 stretch bigs right there. I don't think Orlando would be interesting. I mean, Philly, just if they whiff on other things, there's, as a backup 5 and maybe someone who spends a little bit of time next to Joel Embiid. He's going into the last year of his deal at 11.2. Why not? So you could just move him and create money that way. I'm not a fan of using, like, if you're dumping DeAndre Hunter or Larry Nance Jr. specifically to save money, I'm not the biggest fan of going that route just to use your bigger MLE or to re-sign Sadiq Bey and stay under the tax. I don't know what his market ends up being anyway. So there are options here from Atlanta. I think immediately, though, I like that they kind of catered to, okay, we got a defensive minded wing in here, or someone who can at least scale up to those positions. They still need another one of those, preferably like a 2-way guy. And now they do need to juice up the backup playmaking. I know they have Bogdanovich, but someone like D'Anthony Melton who could do some basic point guard stuff and then continues to elevate your defense as a guard, but who's almost like a wing sometimes in that respect. If everything's okay with his back, I would really like that as an addition for them. I don't really know what else is here, though. I think there was value in them making sure they had picks in years that they don't control their own, even though they have that Sacramento pick that's, I think is it still lottery protected? It might be top 12 protected at this point for next year. It's top 12 protected next year. It might not convey. I mean, the West is brutal. So now you've assured that you're getting one, even if it's an unspectacular one. So I understand the logic. Don't necessarily love the trade. And I'm enough of a sicko that I might have run it back and tried to make it work, but I recognize that there was a real boomer bust proposition there if you weren't able to improve your defensive personnel through other means. Like Dyson Daniels is legitimately someone who can guard the other team's best player. And it felt like with what you were asking Murray to do offensively now, or at least maybe, I mean, even with Trae Young, like we saw defensive slippage from Murray, maybe given his defensive trajectory, you definitely couldn't feel that way about him, even though he came with more dynamic offense. And so you've deepened your rotation and I think improved your defense overall because you go from Murray to Nance and Dyson Daniels. And now there's more what feel like net positive defenders on this roster, where between like, I like Onyeka Okongwu's defense. I think Clint Capella that could be mostly neutral. And I would say the vast majority of matchups, there are certain teams that are tough for him, but he's only 30. And I just feel like what he, like his quote unquote downfall has been way overblown in my opinion. So you look at this roster and between Nance and Okongwu and Daniels, and just even the theory of Jalen Johnson, if you want to frame it this way, there's more interesting, potentially net positive defensive stabs in the dark here. And just, I mean, you did that by exchanging 1 for 2 in Daniels and Larry Nance Jr., but they can't be done. And at least we know like this is the direction. It was the one I predicted. I know Grant has been a big fan of, okay, consider trading Trae Young. I think this kind of, makes it that the Peach Trae prodigy is going to stay. And this is who they're trying to restructure their future around. Would it be different if San Antonio came calling and offered all your picks back? A la what happened? Well, it's different, but like Brooklyn got 2 of the 3 pick rights that it owed Houston back. And then they moved Mikal Bridges to the Knicks. Like that definitely preempted the move to the Knicks. If something like that happened where San Antonio came calling for Trae Young, then maybe they consider it. But this, I think, locks him in as kind of the guiding light of the rebuild. I do think it makes Bogdan Bogdanovich much less gettable to teams that were interested in him because they really do need his offense in this. And so, but maybe I'm misreading their situation, but I think I'm reading it pretty accurately based off what happened here. Do I want to give you sickos some reactions to more stuff that happened? I'm pretty tired. We're under half an hour here, so why not? Let's talk about the Raptors and the Kings really quickly. We'll begin with I guess we'll do both of them in tandem, but let's talk about the trade. The Kings traded number 45, which excuse me, traded number 45, Sasha Vezenkov and Davion Mitchell to Toronto for Jalen McDaniels, excuse me, is the Kings will find. I think this was more of just increasing their financial wiggle room. But I think they will find out. I'm not sure, but he was viewed as it was packaged as they are acquiring this wing defender. And I think, as I came to see after he signed in Toronto, as the Raptors came to see, I think the Kings will also come to see that uh, McDaniels, the concept is a lot more than McDaniels, the reality. So, but lower number. You shave money as part of this deal. You also get, as Toronto, you also get Jamal Sheed, who, if he never gets that ankle injury in the Sweet 16 game, I do wonder if he could go a little bit higher. I saw him mocked in the low 30s somewhere. Some people consider him a first round talent. Defensive monster. He is small, but he's a good playmaker, and he can get up there. I saw he had this one putback. I can't remember what game it was that I saw the highlight from. I'm not going to pretend that I scouted him. He got up, and so if he has any chance of just developing a consistent 3-point shot, and there was a season in college where he shot 80% from the foul line. I think he was over 77% last year. An interesting harbinger. From the Raptors end of this, in conjunction with this trade, they pick up, or afterwards, they pick up Bruce Brown's team option. So they are working over the cap. I'm a little bit disappointed because I kind of loved them as like a team that could maybe go in and make things uncomfortable in the Simone Fontecchio sweepstakes for Detroit. But now they could maybe spend the mini MLE. I don't really know if this hints at anything about their direction other than it feels like they're just prepared to take a much more gradual approach than I think some people assumed. But this also, they did sign Manuel Quickly to a 5-year, $175 million contract. I think I don't remember what we said is over under at. We did say that if anything over 30 would make us a little bit queasy. And it's just, look, the cap is going up. These are the maxes that Brian Windhorst calls them, the fun maxes, that you can envision it panning out fine. He's a good enough player. If he really continues to develop his live dribble playmaking, everything else he does, make sure that this is a deal that ages not just okay or well, but great. And even as it stands in the final year of that, just an estimate, he'll be worth under 20% of the salary cap. So that's how we all, including myself, need to view these things. So the moves they're making, it's kind of like Scotty Barnes just signed his max extension. They're locking them, like you can see the skeleton of a core that they're locking themselves into a little bit. This is still a team that I would argue needs some backup playmaking and also just more shooting in general. I don't know if they think Vezenkov is going to actually fill that, if that was part of the calculus of this trade. Davion Mitchell, I don't think is a good enough playmaker to qualify. They do have a lot of like another feisty defensive body there with him and Emmanuel Quickly, and you have Scotty Barnes here and RJ Barrett, someone who can at least hold up positionally. And then also I did like and so did some of our fellow sickos, as we'll call them in the chat, really like the Jacoby Walter pickup for them. We'll have to see what he looks like on defense, but as a motion shooter, him and Grady Dick, maybe that gives you enough. But just like, it's a lot of flyers there where you're taking a flyer on RJ Barrett shooting, holding up. I think the rim stuff is real with what Toronto does. I don't think you can look at him as a 40% guy. You have Grady Dick, Jacoby Walter. Does Ochai Agbaji turn into something? We know Bruce Brown isn't really a shooter. So I would still like to see them get more shooting in here. Maybe that's something they could address with their mini-mid level. I do think that kind of takes them out of just like, you're not going to be in Malik Beasley or Buddy Hield territory or Simone Fontecchio territory. What does Luke Kennard end up going for if Memphis declines his team option? That could be a name for them to keep an eye on. I'm still good. I can tell you right now, I'm going to end up being higher on this team than consensus entering the regular season. It's happened in every year. I was high on them in their title push, but every year since their title, I've just been higher on them than just most people. And spoiler alert, it really hasn't worked out in my favor. And look, you have Chris Boucher still. So that's really all that matters. And look, the Bruce Brown contract, now that you just have this massive expiring piece, I don't know if it lends itself to anything in the offseason. This just doesn't feel like a team that's going to go the fireworks route. But if you're willing to, maybe they're using it because you want to be one of the team that gets in on, spoiler alert, like Andrew Wiggins if Golden State tries to enter a trade, an opted-in trade for Paul George, which is a rumor going around. Maybe we'll tackle that next. But you have this massive expiring number of 23 million that you can move in the middle of the season for a longer term deal. You can move it now as well too. So your options are open through avenues of improvement. It's just not going to happen through free agency. And I thought maybe they would be able to have more flexibility there. And look, maybe if you dump Chris Boucher, or like if you reroute Sasha Vezenkov or even Davion Mitchell, there's stuff you could do to access the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. But as of right now, this just feels like they're going to follow a more gradual approach. And I think this it already seems sealed, but I would be pretty shocked now if Gary Trent Jr. is back, just because they could use his shooting, but like now the math is really not starting to math for them. So he would be just another name for teams that are in need, maybe to target. But do I think Toronto's done this offseason, and like when it comes to making semi-headlining moves? This is just something I'm circling just because of the nature of what it did. So they are a team to keep an eye on for me, just given the chain of events that have transpired for them. Just the Quickly deal, the Scotty Barnes deal, the taking on money in this deal. So team to watch. The Kings specifically. So people have framed this, and I guess it doesn't need to be inaccurate, but they've now just increased their wiggle room beneath the apron, and in theory could make it easier for them to accommodate a certain someone making over $43 million a year. I do not see this as that. I think once Malik Monk signed, I really think it kind of dissuaded their interest in Zach LaVine. They could use someone who could break down defenses off the dribble in addition to Fox and Malik Monk, but like funneling all the even if it's just Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter to Zach LaVine, that's such a massive risk. That's a defensive downgrade in both spots. I mean, he's not taking on Harrison Barnes' role. And then all of a sudden you need and another thing I saw was well, you have Jalen McDaniels with maybe some of those combo forward minutes. They're getting ready to replace Harrison Barnes. No, I can't. I hope that's not the vision. If anything, I view this more as, okay, if they have I have them a little under $7 million beneath the tax. Are they willing to go into the tax? I don't know. But they could, in theory, are you able to compensate someone to take on Chris Duarte or Jalen McDaniels? And then are they a team? This is what I think. This would be my, I don't know if this is sicko shit, but I'm hoping they made this move with the intention of accessing the bigger MLE and then going ahead and just signing Najee Marshall with that mini MLE, because bigger MLE, excuse me. I'm sure other teams might be interested. Is there a team willing to give him a balloon payment? I don't know if he's going to get, I don't see him. If you were willing to dangle 3 or 4 years at the mid-level, I don't see a team going that far out and giving him noticeably more. If they were just fucking with the Kings and had space and were like, okay, you want 13.2 million instead of 12.9. A full mid-level deal for him, assuming the Kings could access, is 4 years and 55. I would love it. I think he's a perfect fit. It then makes later on, or this offseason, trading Harrison Barnes a lot more palatable. Just, okay, you replace some of those minutes and now you have him and Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis is just defensive perimeter presences. I absolutely love that. And we can't forget about Jalen McDaniels as that wing stopper they acquired. So I kind of like this business from the Kings perspective. It didn't cost a ton to shave the money. And if it increases the chances or just ensures that they will use their non-taxpayer mid-level exception, that I think is a win. And it has to be noted because they aggregated salaries here. They did cut money. So the fact that they cut money there, if they really wanted to, look, they could, I want to make it clear, is they could still just use the bigger MLE now. I'm just not sure if they want to pay the tax for this roster, but they're hard capped now in the second apron because they aggregated salaries for anyone who cares about this stuff. Another noteworthy thing. So Mark Stein on Substack reported that the Golden State Warriors are focused on a Paul George trade. I don't want to spend too much time just because he might end up opting out or opting in and going somewhere else and rendering this all moot. But two noteworthy things happened. That report from Mark Stein saying they're prioritizing Paul George over getting Klay Thompson back. And they also pushed back the guarantee date on Chris Paul. Now, I think there's a lot of confusion about the Warriors cap situation. And I'm not sure if it's because people just are so used to them having massive numbers on the books, or they view it as just they're still factoring in a big payday for Klay Thompson. As of right now, I'm just going to throw Chris Paul's money onto the books. They're less than $5 million into the tax with Chris Paul's $30 million on the books. And so as part of, we know that they're a team that wants to duck the tax entirely. Can you do that while getting Paul George's $48+ million salary on the books if he's in an opt-in trade? The answer is yes. And you can't technically do it with the Clippers if you were to trade all of Paul's salary, $30 million, and combine him with Wiggins to say. They can't do that because they are a second apron team. They're not able to take back more money than they send out. What you could do, one of the things you could do, is guarantee Paul's salary for basically the exact amount that it would take to get to Paul George's number and make that the 2-for-1 swap. Wiggins and Paul is their draft equity there. The other thing that you could do is just rope in an additional team to facilitate that framework. Is maybe Chris Paul's going somewhere else that's going to buy him out and he signs with the Lakers after that or something, or signs with Philly, or signs with, name your team. So you have that option, because as of right now, like, they could be, if they just waived Chris Paul, they could be so far outside the tax. But it seems like they're trying to figure out a way to work with that number or most of that number and then go out and make a big addition. If you did that, what you are doing is you aren't hard capping yourself to the first apron. You aggregated. You'd be hard capping yourself to the second apron. And if it's a dollar for dollar match, which is, I think, what the luxury of Chris Paul's non-guarantee means and pushing it back, you would work within that. So you could still do other things. And maybe that includes, would Klay Thompson be willing to come back for the full mid-level exception type of money? If you're able to, would they just give him I mean, you're not going to give him the four. I don't think they run into over 38 problems with that. But 4 years and 55 million, like, going further out, but it's a lower number. I'm trying to think. Next year is his age 34 season. So when he turned 38 before that contract kicks in. I'll have to look up his birthday, but that is, in theory, they could go for 3 years, and the max on that mid-level would be, if it's a 3-year deal at the full non-taxpayer mid-level, again, there'd have to be things that they're working with, would be, I don't know, it'd be 3 years and $41 million, let's say. So is that something that he would be interested in? Or is he would he just prefer the 2-year balloon payment another team is offering him? Maybe the 4-year one gets interesting if you don't run into the over 38 rule problems. His birthday is in February. So next year is his age 34 season, followed by 36, followed by 37, followed by, I think they could, unless I'm mistaken, I'm doing this off the cuff, otherwise I double check it. You could go 4 years and 55 for Klay with that mid-level type money, or just, I guess, if you could do something like that, is what I'm saying. And I don't know if that's something he would be open to, but you would also need to, what I'm getting at is, cut additional money. And that comes in the form of, okay, well, there's Gary Payton II is on the books for $9.1 million. Kevon Looney, if his deal guarantees, he's going to have $8 million on the books for next year. Probably going to need to compensate. I think you'd probably need to compensate teams. I'm not talking first round equity there, but I forgot, the Warriors sent out cash in a trade already. So never mind. There goes my whole spiel. They are trying to figure out how to they are hard cap beneath the first apron. So, I mean, I think that would have been the plan for them anyway, but that is, given the new rules, that would be something to consider there. So they sent out cash in trades. Wow. That is, I forgot about that. Lindy Waters, though, that fan of his, gets some motion shooting in there. So I very much like that. But, oh no, that's still the second apron. Not allowed to send out cash. I apologize for the stream of conscience. I'm still trying to, this is off the cuff stuff. So again, what you could do to stop my rambling here is guarantee Paul's contract for the exact amount, if we're using Andrew Wiggins as the difference, to get Paul George if he's opting in. And then what you're going to be able to do from there is you're still hard capped to the second apron rather than the first apron. Could you move more money to fit Klay in under that? So in theory, I'm using the mid-level money as just like, you're not actually using your mid-level for Klay. I guess if you renounce him and then use your mid-level to re-sign him, that's what you're doing. But that type of thing where it's, what a 3-year deal that they could give him, like, even if they're able to figure out like 3 and 45 or something, would he take the more guaranteed years over going somewhere for 2 for 40? That's not Golden State. I don't know. The reporting on the negotiations with Klay seemed like it's getting a little tenuous there, but the Paul George stuff, it could be realistic. You'd have to ask yourself though, if it's costing you, let's just say Wiggins, Klay, and Chris Paul, how much better of a team are you with Paul George on the roster? I mean, the idea of him, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Kuminga, Moody, if they're still, I mean, like, I'm assuming the Clippers would want some compensation, but Paul George has all the leverage. It could end up just being that, where it's, okay, we're making this move because maybe do we want to look at Andrew Wiggins, or are we just getting a first round pick? Are we getting Moses Moody? Are we getting a massive trade exception here that we could then look to use? But you're not going to give up a ton to get Paul George because he has all the leverage in this scenario. And assuming the Sixers are still willing to sign him, unless the Clippers are going to try and call his bluff, he can opt in. And if it's like, if that's the deal on the table, maybe the Clippers just take it, unless they're just like, no, we're going to call your bluff. We're not willing to have this massive payroll just so we can have uh, Chris Paul on the books for X amount of money if we can't reroute him, and to have the balance of Andrew Wiggins' deal on there. Maybe Warriors need to include some first round equity to make that work. But I mean, if you're still with, I'm going to say that you don't give up Kuminga or Pods in any of those deals. So if you're left with Steph, Dre, Paul George, Jonathan Kuminga, and Pods, it's just like your 5-player core. And then in theory, GP2 and Kevon Looney are still there. Are you Lindy Waters the third is there? I mean, I like him as a shooting. Trace Jackson Davis. That's like, are you better? You're probably better. Just if GP2 is healthy, that could pitch in on the defensive end. So could Moody, so that Paul George's responsibilities aren't too scaled out there. I think you're definitely going to miss Klay Thompson shooting. Lindy Waters the third. I trust him as a motion guy, but he's not going to replace that. You could dump, though, further salary to then try and increase, like, okay, well, what can we spend in? Again, if it's a dollar for dollar match, that's putting you right at the first apron. If you're shedding other salary, which, again, not outside the realm of possibility, then that opens up a different version of your mid-level to spend. Or again, would you actually feel if there's a way to keep Klay Thompson while doing it? I'm assuming you would have to shed like probably GP2 and Kevon Looney. Like you would just have to shed that money. I'm assuming teams would. I mean, they're both on expiring deals, and you kept Klay. And so all of a sudden it's Klay and Steph and Paul George, Pods, Kuminga, Lindy Waters the third, Trace Jackson Davis. Did I say Draymond Green? Like then you sign like a big off the scrap heap of the minimums, unless you just trust Trace Jackson Davis to take on those minutes and play Draymond at the 5 and maybe some Kuminga at the 5. I don't hate it. I probably like it better if Klay's back, just because I would still want that team to get more shooting, but I don't hate the idea of a Paul George pursuit here. The last thing I will cover is, let's talk about the Denver Nuggets trading Reggie Jackson and 3 second rounders to the Charlotte Hornets. They are now with KCP's cap hold on the books, because he also opted out since we last spoke, and his cap hold is about $22.1 million. They are $2 million over the second apron. That's with his cap hold. That could evaporate if he just re-signs for less. However, Calvin Booth was talking like KCP was already gone based off those comments. I didn't see a video of it, but just the tenor, the way he talked about Christian Brown, makes me think that he's either trying to prepare the fans and the players for losing KCP, or they're just not willing to pay KCP and they really believe in what they're building that much. I don't really know how to feel about this. I think normally I would criticize an organization, and I still will, for just being cheap. But I do think the limitations that come with the second apron are also scaring teams, where it's okay, maybe they were willing to eat this for a year, but just look at all these rattling off the limitations here. Not all of them would apply to the Nuggets, but not allowed to acquire a player in a sign and trade, not allowed to use a pre-existing trade exception, not allowed to take back more money in a trade, can't aggregate contracts when they're sending them out, can't send out cash in a trade. You still can't sign a player who was waived during the regular season that made more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. You're not allowed to sign and trade your own free agent if the incoming salary exceeds the second apron. So if you want, they don't have a free agent where that, well, I guess it's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope that would apply to. You're not allowed to use a trade exception created from a sign and trade. You're allowed to use a trade exception that is created anew, but like you're just not going to have a big one at your disposal unless, again, you can't, like, unless it's created from the Kentavious Caldwell-Pope sign and trade. And because then you're finishing beneath the second apron, it wouldn't matter. I think teams are genuinely scared about working around all those limitations. Now, with that being said, unless KCP's deal is one that just looks toxic, where it's like 4 years and $100 million, I don't even know if that's toxic, but you're questioning whether you could then move him later. You could move him later. And that's the perspective where I come from. This is okay. Maybe Christian Brown and Peyton Watson are ready. Maybe you get more out of Julian Strother. Maybe you explore more of Hunter Tyson. Maybe you move Reggie Jackson. You're okay with Jalen Pickett taking on backup point guard responsibilities. Maybe Deron Holmes is going to come in and have an immediate impact as a backup five. Losing KCP to me right now, he in a vacuum, he's not irreplaceable. I would say for next year specifically, he's irreplaceable to the Nuggets. Borderline all defense guy. I actually had him on my second team, all defensive squad. Just so plug and play on the offensive end as a reliable 3-point shooter. And yeah, he's gone through some troughs. We saw it in the postseason. He is, to me, indispensable to what they're doing. And you have longer term concerns. Jamal Murray's probably going to sign a $208.5 million extension. I think you have to offer it. I don't know how comfortable I am with that, just based off who I believe Jamal Murray to be as a player. You have Aaron Gordon. He's extension eligible. Could be on a new deal next season because of that, the season after this one, because of that player option. Those are long-term concerns. Immediately, I would agree to navigate the second apron just because what else are you going to do? What is the alternative to, okay, if you lose, but let's finish up if you keep KCP, then just figure out how to move him later. Again, unless the deal is just 3 for 90 or something where he's at $30 million a year on the books, unless that's the market for him. So that's where I lean, even with recognizing that this isn't necessarily just about the cost. It could be, I don't think it's not about the Nuggets' self-belief in their developmental program. I'm going to tell you that right now. But I do also think that the limitations that come with it are genuinely scaring off teams. Now, in this case, I really don't think it matters because it's for one season. What are the things that I listed? Are you what do you want the Nuggets to aggregate into or to take back more money in a trade for? Honestly, what are you looking for them to do? And now look, losing KCP, that's still that's not gonna necessarily open up a ton of options for them. If we just remove his $22 million cap hold from the books, you're looking at a team that's, let's just say, we'll round it, $20 million below the second apron and a bunch of money. Like at that point, you're just below the tax. You could get there if you're not, but that's without any other moves. So if you're committed to staying within the first apron, you could maybe use a good portion of the bigger mid-level exception, but just letting KCP walk as of now, based on the way that I'm reading the books, you're not just going to be able to use the $12.9 million mid-level. And so if you even think that can be replaced where it's maybe Najee Marshall would come, do we view D'Anthony Melton as some type of case? These are imperfect. I want to be clear. These are imperfect players to be sure, but I'm just players that would fall in mid-level territory. You might be able to afford D'Anthony Melton. I don't know if he's getting the full mid-level here, but so that's what you're doing. And then trusting the youth, I guess sure, but it's not like you're going to open up a ton of options by letting KCP walk. I understand the financial realities of it all, but for at least next season, I don't know what the deal needs to be. Even 4 for 100, I would think that could be moved. He's 31. That comes into the equation. I think they're going to, honestly, there's a chance maybe they don't miss him a ton defensively because of what Peyton Watson and Christian Brown can do there. And we even saw Christian Brown was probably their best defender against Anthony Edwards and still their best option. I think they'll miss him offensively unless you're going to see a big leap coming from Christian Brown or Peyton Watson or Julian Strawther as a shooter, both volume and efficiency wise. And so for next season specifically, I just don't buy into the idea that you can let KCP walk. And so I will hammer the Nuggets accordingly, unless they're, I don't know, fall ass backwards and do a good trade. I just don't know what the target is, what the deal is, what the free agent is you'd be comfortable with. Okay, if let's just say you lose KCP and end up with Najee Marshall, I guess I'd feel you'd be fucking huge. I don't know that I want to see Najee Marshall defend so many guards all the time, but he can do it. And you have Christian Brown and Peyton Watson that pitch in there as well. You'd be fucking massive. Najee Marshall, Jokic, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr. I don't think you're starting Marshall in that scenario anyway, but you could just run these ultra massive lineups. So that is something, if you tell me that's what they do, I just don't think that that's what ends up happening. Sure. Even D'Anthony Melton is kind of a fallback plan. I need to know what his back is like. And then you're kind of killing two birds with one stone where it's okay. Melton can guard up a little bit, but he can guard both guard spots. And we're getting kind of a backup point guard who can do basic things, but we're still going to want to look at Jalen Pickett because Melton's not a caps lock floor general. So he's more in the vein of Javon Carter. He's more supercharged to me on the defensive end and not as good as Javon Carter's coming off a really poor shooting season. So he's in the mold of a 3-and-D guard rather than a 3-and-D wing, but he can defend at points like a wing when he's healthy. So I guess that would make me feel okay, but you need to even at that point, it's okay, but you still haven't addressed who's the veteran backup big man. Are we running it back with DeAndre Jordan, or are we really playing Deron Holmes this many minutes? Is this finally the year of Zeke Naji? Maybe that's how you cut further costs, is now grease the wheels of a Zeke Naji salary dump, and that's how you access your bigger MLE while losing KCP. I honestly don't know if you can approximate enough of his value using that mid-level. I'd argue you can't, because even the players I'm listing, what if Philly just says, "Hey, we're going to give D'Anthony Melton, we missed out on cap space elsewhere," or are they the team that signed KCP? That'd be really funny. So there's no guarantee that those players end up in Denver. And I will say this, I I think you can make the case that it's more complex than the Nuggets cheaping out here. I think you can make that case. I will listen to that case. But this feels like to me, long term, yes, the parts around Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, you're exchanging them out and you're hoping you hit on someone who ends up better or higher end than KCP and a Watson and a Christian Brown, maybe. But the parts around Jokic and Jamal Murray are always going to kind of be shimmied in and out. It still feels to me that by letting him walk, you're just sort of punting on another year of prime Nikola Jokic. And that fucking sucks. And I guess you could argue they did not punt on Jokic's prime Jokic year this season. He won MVP. They were my title pick through and through until they were no longer in the playoffs. So they have that going for them. And ultimately, if they end up healthy, would I rule them out of the contender circle? No. Are they a team that, is that the difference between liking the Knicks or the Timberwolves better than them next season? Maybe. So Denver's just another team to monitor with all the stuff going on there. I think that's going to do it. Other stuff that we really didn't get to, but it's going to become dated. I don't know. Grant's away, so I don't know how we're going to be reacting to free agency on this podcast, but we will be doing a 3-hour live stream on Bleacher Report and the Max app, 7 p.m. Eastern time to 10 p.m. Eastern time. So that's 4 p.m. Pacific to 7 p.m. Pacific on Sunday, June 30th. Go check us out. Show us some support in the comments. I want to see you familiar sickos in there. We'll have guests on there. It'll be a good time. Hopefully, Grant and I will be able to get something up on Monday, like Monday for Tuesday or something, or maybe I'll roll solo, or I have to look into getting a guest, but I don't want to bother the league-wide guests this time of year because they have a lot going on, just like myself. But there will be content coming out. I think we've proven that much if you followed along. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. I sacrificed, for anyone who cares, I punted on at least one meal. It's really late and I need to go to sleep because I got to get to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. Anyone who knows I'm a fake fitness junkie, I know I don't look like it, but I'm in the middle of a bulk and I'm sacrificing calories for you sickos. That's just you got to do what you got to do. I mean, has anyone ever made a bigger sacrifice than that? Like that meal would have been, I think it's like 1,200 calorie meal. I just punted on that so that I could ramble to myself for an hour, almost an hour. I should check the time on this. Almost an hour. So please just subscribe. If you've done that already, tell people about us, share this thing, comment on YouTube. Really appreciate all the support we've been getting lately, but subscribe across everywhere, all multiple platforms, steal people's phones. As Grant said, break into their house. Can you hypnotize them into not only subscribing themselves, but then getting other people to subscribe? It's like a HardwoodKnocks pyramid scheme or HardwoodKnocks subscription inception. Let's really get that going here. But in all seriousness, appreciate all of your support. Until next time, and it'll be soon. And as always, I leave you with a shout out to the one, the only, the one who could maybe solve all the Denver Nuggets' problems once they lose KCP, Frank Ntilikina.